I'm obviously white, yes, full on that privilege, and I'm art teacher / illustrator. Yeah, I've been married to my beautiful wife, Judith, for 5 years. We've been together for 15. Because it's been legal for 5 years, but we've been together for 15.
Yep, my name is Judith. I'm married to her, if you didn't catch that. Jeez. I'm going to be really persnickety about this microphone, and I apologize in advance for that. I'm an animator. I am a bona fide non-binary lesbian from New York, and I love cartoons. So I'm here to talk about them. I'm also white, just like her, like in case nobody. All right, okay.
You can see that part pretty easily, but one of the reasons we're mentioning that is because
it's part of our disclaimer.
Yes, we are very aware that we have a limited point of view, that a whole bunch of who we are can affect our perspective. Now, well, we've done lots of reading. We've talked to lots of friends who are various different ethnicities, friends who have very different experience, friends who are various different letters of the LGBTQIA community. But not even they are a monolith. I'm not a monolith for white demi-bi girls. I'm not. So
I am.
So basically, and we also cannot physically compel all of our friends across all these different identities to be ready to come do this panel with us. If people are welcome to join us, but I'm not going to like strong arm somebody into representing everything about their identity.
Just put on a rainbow jumpsuit and whisper the word, assemble.
That said, while we've done lots of research and we always take constructive feedback, we could still have blind spots. And we apologize if we run into a blind spot of something that's crystal clear to you.
Yeah, sorry in advance, once again. Also, since we're going to be talking about the history of LGBTQ representation in cartoons in America, we're going to talk about a lot of things that are problematic. And if we mention that something's problematic, but you still like it, we still like you, and we don't judge you for still liking it, because we all love problematic things, and as queer folk, we have to settle very often.
Yes. It's completely valid if you find a lot of value in something, if you found a bit of yourself in something that somebody else thinks is problematic. I mean, I partially figured out I was bi through Ranma 1/2. And if you're familiar with that, it's a homophobic and transphobic piece when you really look at it.
Yep.
But I figured out I was bi through that, and it's still very important to me. It's okay if your fave is problematic, you're still cool.
So, we're going to talk about how we personally define LGBTQIA. Here it is. Anyone who's not straight, anyone who's not cis. That's it. We don't gatekeep over here. I love your serious face.
Next slide.
And what is a renaissance?
A renaissance.
Welcome back to middle school.
I'm an art teacher, get ready. So a renaissance is a big revival in the world of art and learning. That means that suddenly the quality got good again, more or less, and there's an explosion of creativity. The arts are getting funded, more or less. Lots and lots of stuff is happening, and it's great.
In this case, it's kind of like a zombie revival where something was dead and then comes to life and it's awesome.
No, it's still a renaissance. Basically, there have been 2 animation renaissances. There was the golden age of animation, and then the animation renaissance in the 90s that saved Disney and created Nickelodeon and Cartoon from Cartoon Network, basically giving a lot of stuff to artists. And then we kind of had a lull again in the late 90s and early 2000s. And we're having another renaissance again because all of us millennials who grew up watching the 90s renaissance are making cartoons.
And watching anime.
Except this time, the second renaissance is gay.
So about media messaging to young audiences. As kids watching cartoons, we start forming our identities based on what we see there. And I know, right?
Turn it away from you.
It is turned away from me. Can you still hear me now?
Yes.
No, okay, I'm really bad at projecting. So, is there somebody? Is there a staff member here? Because we're getting some nasty feedback.
If you turn the volume down but speak directly into the mic, it generally helps.
Is this the volume? Where is the volume?
2 inches away from your mouth.
This is so exciting, y'all.
Yeah, I don't know how to turn the volume down.
Isn't that knob right there in front of you?
This says laptop interface.
Box with a bunch of different sliders and buttons on it.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Right button. What you want to do is put that right in front of your face. I'm going to go turn it down. You can speak louder.
Okay. I'm talking again, but I'm talking in a very tame voice right now. I'm not excited.
I'm talking also in a really
All right.
tame voice.
Anyway, I was
This
saying,
sounds really intimate now.
I know, we sound like we're on the radio now. Yep. Oh, that's so much better.
This is still really loud.
No, but there's no more. Yeah. Okay. Man. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Anyway,
Media messaging to young audiences.
kids receive a lot of influential messages through their TV shows, and people making the TV shows are quite aware of this. It's not by accident, no matter what they say. A lot of the messages that we get as children are the social possibilities that we will run into when we grow up.
These are kinds of relationships that can exist. For example, if something is in a cartoon, then it may or may not be something that can happen in real life. But if it won't even appear in a cartoon, if it won't even appear in fiction, then it must be super impossible, even unimaginable.
It won't even register as a possibility to a young person. And as it says right there, LGBTQIA people aren't included in these possibilities. The life path that is taught to us as children by TV usually involves a single heterosexual path as the only route to happiness.
And not just a heterosexual path, but the idealistic white American 1950s path.
Yeah, you know, the one where you grow up to a certain age, meet your perfect heterosexual counterpart, who looks, if you're a man, exactly like you, but with eyelashes.
Also a lighter color.
Yes. You have a perfect amount of babies, and your story ends and everything's great. Okay, if you liked this movie, I'm sorry, this really pissed me off. But, you know, I've got that big gay chip on my shoulder that makes me view things this way.
It's not just that, though. It's not just that, oh, we've seen this a million times, and it's, 2018 when this movie came out, and we're seeing it again. It's a huge part of it was that this movie was all about recloseting. The dragons literally solve the problem by being like, we're just gonna closet our entire society or indefinitely until somehow humans better themselves.
I mean, that's basically what they said. Like, the dragons need to go into permanent hiding until humans are ready for them, because that's how allegories like that, like racism and homophobia and sexism, that's how it works. Hide the other thing until people are nice. Always works that way, right?
And that is so antithetical to the entire point of the first two movies. The first two movies were really inspiring for a lot of marginalized folks, be it people with disabilities,
Especially people with disabilities. For that
yeah,
movie.
people with disabilities, queer people, people of color, because it very much spoke to the idea that you have to be out there to create change. You have to be willing to fight. You have to be willing to have dialogue. You have to be willing to approach getting change, at the very least, by being visible. And so there would sometimes be sometimes you have to fight, sometimes you have to talk. And sometimes, like, one without the other isn't going to work. But the idea that you have to be out there. And the fact that they just completely do a 180 on that in the third movie made me profoundly sad. Because the messaging they're sending is, just don't try. You just gotta hide and play it safe.
I'm not saying
You have to lose your friends. You can't even have your friends while you're having your 2.5 babies. You have to like completely save yourself off in this segregated nuclear family structure.
the American way. I'm not saying we demand gay dragons.
Although that would be nice.
Yeah, actually, I kind of am. But at the very least, I'm just asking, maybe don't do this?
Maybe don't have the whole solution to being marginalized being going into hiding.
Going into hiding and reproducing. Weird. Straight people are weird. Anyway, enough about that. Time for gay history. Nobody knows it. So we're going to learn some. Isn't that great? We're starting at the 1920s, and we're starting with live action, and we're starting with film, because guess what didn't exist at this point? Animation or gay people. No. So the image there is from the movie Wings. This scene is just as gay as it looks, and this movie won the Academy Award in 1927 for Best Picture. Pretty cool. We had representation in the 1920s. It was small, and it was very troublesome, but it was less troublesome than you might imagine.
Yeah, I mean, there still was the very bury your gays trope. This is a bury your gays happening right here. Tragic death. But there was something.
It was still played with stereotypes. There were images of mannish women to represent lesbians and effeminate dudes. And I'm not saying those people don't exist, but that is not all that encompasses us. Also, the representation was used to shock audiences or titillate audiences because it was the 20s and we were roaring.
And we want to get those butts in the seats because I want that quarter. Actually,
Yeah.
it was probably more like a nickel, right? A nickel. I want that nickel.
Ha, yeah.
Ah.
Nickelodeons had some pretty dirty stuff in them often enough. But anyway, yeah, film was going in that direction where it showed a lot of stuff that was meant to shock audiences because that was what made them sit down and pay to see them. And that was why this came about.
So, social purity groups have always been a thing. Well, there'll be somebody who is socially conservative and they decide, I think everyone else should be too, and they form a group and they try to have influence over everyone else.
They still exist.
Yes.
Lots of them still exist. We will take questions after the panel.
So social purity groups were having a time in
And
the post-20s because
They did not like movies. Movies had sex and gay people and women wearing pants, and they were upset.
Scary stuff.
So one of the very important court cases back then was whether or not film was protected free speech. And the court case decided that it was not. The film industry panicked because
They
they knew
panicked
they were
hard.
about to be government regulated.
And so they were like, we are so moral, you guys. We are going to regulate ourselves. We're going to have these rules that everybody who makes films has to follow, so you don't have to pass any laws. We've got this.
We'll be good, we promise. So that was the Hays Code. And here's an example of the Hays Code. I'm not going to read all of this because it will take a lot of time and you'll get depressed. But feel free to scan it yourself. I will point out that the one that I have labeled in red over there, and any inference of sex perversion, that's us. And that's one of those things that's not allowed.
So inference, that means you can't even like have a line of dialogue that says something happened. Inference.
No acknowledgement whatsoever may be permitted. How the Hays Code lasted for decades. We still feel its influence in film and television even today. I tried to look up whether or not the Hays Code ever applied directly to television, and it looks like it didn't, but its influence was strong enough that it basically did.
Yeah.
So we're going to skip ahead through all those awful decades, especially the 50s. The 50s can go screw itself. And we're going to start at 1969. Nice. Where the Stonewall Riots occurred in our hometown.
Yeah. Okay, Stonewall Riots, there had been a thing going on for a few decades where the police would be like, I really hate gay people and I hate queer people, and the thing I'll do in order to get away with just beating up some queer people once in a while is we're going to revoke the liquor license of any place that consistently serves queer people. As such, the only places queer people ended up being able to drink were mafia-owned places that didn't have liquor licenses.
That was rough.
And so then the police had the excuse, this is a mafia place that doesn't have a liquor license. We get to go in here and do a raid. And then they beat up all the queer people.
Frequent raids in which queer people were dragged out of bars and humiliated. Trans people were dragged into bathrooms and humiliated, forced to expose their real gender to the cops.
So this was a thing, and this is part of what created.
This was just part of life back then.
This is part of what created a lot of our legacy of queer culture. The butch and femme dynamic is partially because of this. Like, butches were sort of like vigilante protectors.
Well, I mean, that what's the word? Butch and femme stuff existed way before this.
But it became more pronounced during the period in the 50s. Like the 40s and 50s were the heyday of the butch and femme dynamic, for example. And there was a lot of tight-knit community going on across what's now considered the whole LGBT community. At any rate, there was finally...
there was one night where one raid was being conducted on the Stonewall Inn, and people just had it.
Like a particular lesbian who does not want credit.
No individual wants credit.
Yeah, but basically she got punched by a cop and was like, why isn't anyone doing anything? And then people started doing things. A few trans women threw bricks and again, mostly queer people of color are to thank for standing up to this.
They're always to thank for the big movements that we have. I just want to point that out.
Yeah. I mean, there are white queer people being like, that's cool, let me join.
I'll do that too, and then take credit. Yeah.
But at any rate, this was the beginning of the queer civil rights movement, which was absolutely riding on the coattails of the black civil rights movement. And this was intersectional.
And protests, and we had riots. It wasn't just the one riot. It never is just the one riot when it comes to us gays. We had lots of them, and we got attention.
There had been actually staged marches where all the women would wear dresses and all the men would wear nice suits, and they would quietly and civilly march on Washington with these neatly written signs, and it didn't do anything. Nobody cared until after Stonewall.
I'm wearing a dress. See? Are you going to listen to me now? Yeah. Oh, another good thing that happened is right around the 1970s is when the Hays Code was finally defeated in court.
And so between the burgeoning civil rights movement for the queer community and the Hays Code getting finally axed, we started to get a chance to demand actual representation in media.
And to an extent, we succeeded. We had some gay characters start to appear in television, a lot in the 1970s. Again, it was very subdued. It was problematic with stereotypes and all of that, but it was happening. It wasn't forbidden anymore, and that was a good thing. And we could have progressed from there pretty easily, as we have recently, but something else happened to take our reputation down a few notches.
I wish this chart was bigger. I doubt that everyone in the back can see it super clearly, but the dark line is the people who thought being with an adult consensually who is considered the same gender as you should be illegal. This is not marriage. This is literally, are you allowed to be intimate with this person?
At all.
And then the green line is, yeah, consenting adults should do what they want.
Which green line? They're both green.
The light green line. The dark one. It looks black from there. Okay.
That's true.
The dark green line is should not be allowed. The light green line is should be allowed to consenting adults do what consenting adults do. And you see that spike. It was kind of half and half, where people were like, half the people said no, half the people said yes, and then the AIDS crisis happened, and suddenly a whole bunch of people that were in the yes camp changed to the no camp.
Yep. Like it says there, LGBTQIA Americans suffered and died by the thousands. because we were not educated about the disease. The government pointedly refused to address it or do anything about it because they wanted us to die.
Reagan.
Oh, yeah.
Reagan.
What pretty and do as little as possible.
Yeah, like we said, public opinion of LGBT plus Americans also suffered a lot. And media representations changed. A lot of representation turned into villainous, negative characters. Or
Villainous-
characters who were doomed to die.
Yeah, extremely tragic. Or
Yeah.
villains. And there
And-
really wasn't anything in between.
Like I said, the raids were just part of life back when they were happening. So was death from AIDS. It was a part of life for LGBT communities. And so was the scorn we were receiving from a public who was all too happy to get rid of us. And yeah, that definitely affected how we appeared in movies and TV. But
However,
the one good thing,
is that even bad press is press.
they couldn't
Frankly,
hide
they
us.
couldn't stop talking about us. We could not be erased from existence while this was happening.
So you're probably wondering where the cartoons are. Sorry, there were no AIDS cartoons. I don't think. The thing is, there wasn't any gay representation in cartoons, not overt, through this time, because animation is seen as kids' media, and we are super child inappropriate, you guys. I don't even know what I'm doing here. I saw a kid in the hallway. I ran and hid.
And if we ever have a kid, we're going to have to just be, you know, Aunt Judith and
Yeah.
Aunt Natalie. The just friends sisters type.
But as we started to move on into the 90s and people were no longer to avoid the topic of us, you know, existing, we started to see some changes. And the changes came in the form of coding. Now we're going to explain coding. We are coding. A device used to include queer people in media without actually including them. How convenient.
So characters exhibit traits that are associated either stereotypically with queer people or that reference authentic queer culture. But they won't outright say this person is queer in the text at all.
They appear gay, they will never be confirmed gay. This is definitely a relic of the 1920s. Here are some examples.
Just so you know, that
See the
that
guy,
strapping
does
young
anybody
man.
know? The crowd here is older. Does anybody know who that is in the top left?
Fisto.
Yes! See, when I give this panel at Anime Cons, no one knows who Fisto is. No one. This time we got one. His name is Fisto.
He's from He-Man.
Of course he is.
You mean the show where all the students were super buff and half naked?
Yep. He lives in the woods.
The most heterosexual show you've ever seen.
He wears a furry loincloth. He has a big fist.
I like the way he's got those straps all over his chest.
And in the episode where he's introduced, he is capturing men in the woods with a sticky white fluid.
And they can't get away.
Wish I could make this up. And the other one is SpongeBob. You know, the social purity groups are always after that one.
So this is a way to get stuff past the radar. This is a way for people to feel a bit seen, for creators who can't really be out to just put bits of things they like into the things they make. It makes it easier to identify with some characters when you're not given anything else.
Yeah.
But the bad...
There's a lot of bears out there who would like that Fisto representation nowadays. Yeah.
The bad...
It allows the media to dodge actual representation and keep on being chickens.
And boy, does it involve lots of villainry. And these villains can be delightful. I mean, we've got queer villains that we love, like the iconic Dr. Frankenfurter. But we're talking again about media messaging to kids. Messaging that's saying what is good and what is bad.
And mostly what they're getting is effeminate men are bad, and sometimes they get masculine women are bad because Disney tells them so. Yeah. These villains are great. I just want to say they're a lot of fun, but they do present a problem.
But at the same time, they're like, how can we make a villain charismatic and likable, but still definitely evil. Gay! Gay people are so much fun, but also evil, right?
Right. I got this. You guys know that Ursula was based off of a drag queen named Divine, right? Okay. Everybody knows that at this point, but just in case anyone doesn't, there she is. Beautiful. Want to keep going?
Yeah.
On the good side of Disney, we're going to lecture you about Beauty and the Beast right now and how it's 100% gay. Woo!
All right. This is my thing.
I know.
Howard Ashman was...
Ashman.
Howard Ashman. Ashman. Sorry. He was basically a brilliant lyricist. He worked
You guys know Alan Menken? Okay. He was his musical partner. He wrote the lyrics to Alan Menken's music.
And Beauty and the Beast had been in production hell for years. It looked like it was going to get benched. It looked like it was going to never happen. And he basically rescued this movie by starting to write things that were good.
Yeah, they handed it over to the Menken-Ashman team and said, make this movie good or it's not happening. So they did.
And at the time, Ashman was battling AIDS. He was losing that battle, and he poured a lot of himself into writing the lyrics, especially for the Beast.
The Beast is a man who believes he's incapable of loving or being loved. He is slowly transforming into something that is no longer human, in which he will eventually lose his body and his mind. He's isolated from society, and when society comes for him to kill him, he is willing to hand himself over.
He, the society is terrified of him. There is the mob that sings "Kill the Beast," which is not unlike the lived experiences of marginalized people.
They literally sing, "We don't like what we can't understand. In fact, it scares us."
Yes. He's basically an allegory for a queer man who is facing losing himself and everything he's known to AIDS. And he's re-finding his humanity in the process of things getting as dark as possible. Belle is akin to, say, a queer person who still passes, a queer person who the cis-het society considers salvageable.
But she really is a funny girl.
I found her very relatable as a bi person, because my parents literally tried to be like, "You're not bi. We need to get rid of her." They took my car away so I couldn't help her get to work, so that she would be forced to become homeless and move back to where she came from in New York.
Where I came from, yep.
And that's what happened, but we persevered. But literally, I grew up watching this movie a million times, but it wasn't until I was 19 and in love and struggling to make our relationship work that it made me cry.
For the first time, yeah, same.
I understood for the first time. Even without knowing that the creator was a queer man dying from AIDS, I understood the kinds of bigotry messaging that was involved here, because I was living it to a lesser extent, but I was living it with you.
If you watch this movie again, the very end of the credits, there's a tribute to Ashman that says he gave a mermaid her voice and a beast his soul. And all of those things we pointed out, these similarities, they're not a coincidence.
So Beauty and the Beast is gay.
Yep. So we're moving on ahead to the marriage equality debate. Now, marriage equality had been in politics. We finally started marching for it since the 70s, but obviously it didn't start getting a lot of attention until the 90s, when Hawaii ruled that its own same-sex marriage ban was unconstitutional. Conservatives panicked because they always panic when something good happens. And they started passing constitutional amendments in their own states, strictly defining marriage as between one man and one woman. I'm sure we've all heard that more times than we ever care to.
And eventually this culminated in the Defense of Marriage Act, which Bill Clinton signed at midnight in a closed-door session because he was ashamed of it. But he still signed it because look at how many people were for that.
Yeah, okay, I want to point out, the blue people are not the ones who voted against it. The little missing people are the ones who voted against it. The blue people are the Democrats who voted for it.
So this was a very bipartisan law that was passed.
It sucked. And it set us back again for another decade until Massachusetts Supreme Court ruled that their ban on same-sex marriage, once again, was unconstitutional.
This Gallup graph, I love Gallup graphs, shows the opinion on marriage equality specifically. And you can see how it basically shifts completely over the course of about 20 years.
Despite the setback of DOMA and of George W. Bush being president, we continued fighting. And that as long as we fight, as long as we were loud, the media had to keep acknowledging us.
And I think it's just amazing how much we've come in this short amount of time. When we first got together, that's when George W. Bush was making his State of the Union address about how he was going to defend marriage.
Yeah, that was a great moment for me.
So we thought this
young
would,
person.
we did not think that this was going to be a thing, that we would be married in 10 years. And that's incredible. But back to the topic.
Woo! Back to cartoons. This is Dumbledoring, a topic that you can start on because you're the Harry Potter fan. I think still.
I don't know anymore. I loved the first 7 books. I have not liked the content that came out since then, and I have not liked the things that Rowling has said since then, and
Yep.
I don't like that she's a TERF. It's going to be a while before I can even touch the first 7 books now because of that last one.
That's why we call it Dumbledoring, because of the Dumbledore announcement made by J.K. Please, please, please shut the fuck up, Rowling.
Basically, right after the last book came out, she was like, by the way, Dumbledore's gay and dead. And you know what? Dumbledore was my favorite character. It was only 2007. All the marriage stuff was still illegal. And I was like, this is great. Oh, I was so happy.
Can make you feel good. It's all right.
I was delighted when that came out in 2007.
But she's not the only one who's guilty of this kind of thing. Other creators do it too. They will claim that the character is canonically LGBT+ after the work is over.
After there's nothing to lose. It makes them look really progressive while not risking anything.
And it suddenly, in the 2000s, became more prominent in kids' media. So we have some good points and bad points about it, and a bunch of characters who this was done to.
Again, it's a way to get stuff past the radar. And we can look back on these characters and be like, I know why I liked that character now. And it's really nice to think that the creator had the same thing in mind when they were writing this character.
The bad thing is that cis-straight creators get a little progressive badge on their sash for basically doing nothing. And we can't really say this is actual representation because the work is over once the announcement is made. We can't look at it in that context while we're watching it, and we'll never know if they actually made the decision to make the character gay during or after to just get, some cred.
And in some of these cases, I do think that it was intentionally them doing the best that they could during, because when you're making a serialized show, you could get the plug pulled at any time. It's not as egregious as it was with Rowling, who was like just a billionaire. There was no plug getting pulled at all.
She would have been fine.
She'd have been fine. But it's still definitely not ideal. And how you notice that all the examples we have here are male?
Yep. American media tends to find gay men more threatening because sexism. Nobody wins in that situation. And so they get buried a little bit more in this kind of thing, less acknowledged, and that sucks. But in the 2010s, we start to see more subtext. Stephen.
a lot of the creators, again, millennials who grew up watching the 90s Renaissance cartoons and then anime.
Yep.
Got to lots of influences we have melding together here in the stuff that's coming out in the 2010s.
Subtext is when common romantic tropes are applied to same-sex relationships. So two characters who are friends act in ways that are like if you switched one of them into a boy and one into a girl, you would definitely think they were together. Mm-hmm. But the relationships are still portrayed as friendships. In fact, they often use the word friend way too often just to reassure social purity groups.
Gal pals!
Yep. Just guys being dudes. We, as viewers, tend to assume that it will never be brought into actual text. It will always remain subtext because creators never want to answer these questions when they're brought up. This kind of thing happens a lot in anime, and it's probably where a lot of creators picked these things up from. Oh, I also want to, I have not gotten to add a slide for Rocko's Modern Life with their trans representation. Yes! But I want to acknowledge them. I feel like they did that right compared to this mess. I don't know if this show ever premiered in the US, but it was an Australian and Canadian production called Shizao. It's about a cis boy who inherits a superhero identity from his aunt, in which he transforms into her battle clothes, into a superhero named Shizao. There's an episode in this where he has to tell his dad what he does and how he transforms into a female clothed superhero, and some people thought it was like a coming out episode. It was uncomfortable. It made them, they felt like it was relatable. And yeah, social purity groups hated it, because of course they did. But at the same time, the creator got asked about it because it seemed to draw a lot of trans parallels, and he chickened out. That's what they do. He said that he never intended for it to come off as trans representation. He gave a lot of safe answers, and trans representation continues to be minimal, but things are getting better, and I need to make a new slide for that because things keep advancing. Rocko's Modern Life did it right by actually talking to trans people. Wow, crazy idea.
Wild.
Who here saw that? Cool, a lot of people. So, more subtext.
For those of you who can't read, the picture of Princess Bubblegum there says, inhales Marceline's shirt sensually.
A lot of networks didn't respond well to this, and we won't ever really know how much they censored because people aren't usually permitted to talk about that. But we do know that official speculation on romantic relationships between same-sex characters was often shut down rather aggressively in the 2010s.
And very, very often, at a point where we now know the creators definitely wanted it to be queer characters, they were still kind of forced to not answer questions when fans were asking questions.
Yes, they would give very frustrating, coy, or non-committal, or funny answers in response to, "Am I represented in your show? What do you think?"
If you see yourself here, that's wonderful. I think any interpretation is great.
Still, it was nice to see things like this that started to look pretty undeniable. The episode of Adventure Time that kicked off the whole Marceline Bubblegum in a relationship thing was called What Was Missing? Have many people seen that? Okay.
It's great.
It's really gay. That episode was boarded by a young storyboarder named Rebecca Sugar. And Adam Muto. He's okay too.
That's the episode that shifted me from liking Adventure Time casually to being a big fan.
Rebecca Sugar is a queer person who put her own personal experience into the story of that episode and the story of those characters. She eventually left the show, which upset us at first until we found out she was getting her own. Which is called Steven Universe. That show would change the history of our representation in cartoons. But first, this happened. I really wish this happened in a linear order so that I didn't have to jump around, but hey.
So, there were a lot of people being like, this came out of nowhere. I was like, no, it didn't. By the end of season 3, there was definitely stuff happening there. Like, they're only writing each other, and then, like the guys who make the Avatar series.
This moment, the blush with the, like, I like your hair. I don't look at my friends that way. Maybe I'm weird.
And I'm also just going to say the people who make Avatar, they're great writers in many respects, but they're not great at writing relationships. And so in their coding, it just means like if somebody blushes, it means a crush. So I was like, I know what that means. I watched The Last Airbender. That means that it's romantic. I know these guys' visual code.
Okay, again, how many people watch the end of Korra? Like, I hope nobody's completely confused. Okay, cool.
And so these gal pals, just friends, trademark.
TM.
They do this thing where they walk off onto a vacation in a magical other world, and then they turn to each other and look deep into each other's eyes and hold hands in really, really friendshipy way.
Very heterosexual.
Anyway, it was so friendshipy that a lot of people were like, wow, what a great friendship. And the creators had to get on Tumblr and be like, this is a romantic relationship. Your hetero lenses are this thick, and they're both bi. Yes, it's queer. Yes, it's queer.
I was watching that unfold like live in real time because I immediately hopped on Tumblr to watch the straight people get upset.
And when we say live in real time, we mean, of course, on the internet, because Nickelodeon had pulled this show from cable. It was online release only. They had given permission to make very subtle endgame, but only now that it wasn't on TV anymore.
Mm-hmm. This is an example of the first openly bisexual main characters in a kid's TV show, but it wasn't on TV, technically. And the relationship happened at the very, very end of the series, which is just one step ahead of after the series, so yay.
Read the comics, though. There's queer people involved in the comics. There's kissing. There's talking about the relationship. Read the comics.
So Steven Universe was airing around that time, and very shortly after that, Jailbreak aired.
This changed our lives.
Yeah, we're doing a Steven Universe panel tonight at 11:30, and
it is called Here We Are in the Future and It's Gay. Or alternatively, Here We Are in the Future and It's Gay.
Are we gonna sing at the panel? I don't want to sing.
You don't have to.
Okay, we can do it.
But it's a Steven panel, you ought to.
So this was the episode that introduced the characters Ruby and Sapphire, who are a pair of non-binary female-coded lesbians in a romantic relationship. That's canonically what they are, no matter what any weirdo saying that sisters do this stuff says to you.
This is also one of the first times that creators were actually answering the questions. So, is this a romantic relationship? And the creators deigned to answer.
Yes.
And they were forced by the executives to delete those tweets.
Yep. Ian Jones-Cordy, who was a producer at the time, was asked, would you say that these two characters are lesbians, or are they non-binary? How would you identify them? And he said, I would call them non-binary lesbians.
Well, specifically, somebody said, would you consider them non-binary lesbians? And he said, yes, that's exactly how I would phrase it.
He was forced to delete that. Joe Johnston, who is a storyboarder on the show, was just asked point blank, is this a romantic relationship? And he just said, YES, period. That's it. They forced him to delete that.
So 2015, that is only about 4.5 years ago that the execs are making these people who are working really hard to give us representation, making them delete the confirmation.
But even though that was happening, that didn't stop the gay train from moving forward with this show. Or in real life. Same year we get Jailbreak, we also get marriage equality. Coincidence?
Well, it's really not a coincidence because media and actual social movements do go hand in hand. Not only does media help to influence social movements, but the executives who are trying to gatekeep media are like looking at social movements to try and keep a pulse of what they can actually publish.
You gays have
Is
money
it-
now?
is it-
Are they paying? Are they paying for
Gay,
things now?
if gay marriage is a thing now, there's going to be kids with gay parents. more often.
$30,000 gay weddings. $40,000 gay divorces.
And they're looking at the Gallup polls of the changing opinions on this. So executives, their bottom line is money, and they're going to be tracking things.
Yep, rising correlations between trends in animation and social progress. Imagine that. Anyway, here's the gay train traveling on with Steven Universe, and we haven't even got images from Steven Universe Future in this, which continues. But yeah, lots and lots of queer relationships. We've got some gay necking over there. The pickup episode, I could not believe that was a real thing, that episode. We have non-binary characters, not just one anymore, and an intersex character, like lots of gender expansive stuff going on. I don't want to seem like I'm worshiping this person, but honestly, she was willing to do things that nobody else was. She fought for progress when no one else would fight. That's why we got change.
I'm just going to read these quotes because I think they're really well put. It struck me how critical it is that there are LGBTQIA characters in G-rated content, that the G rating said everything, because as long as certain people are considered to be inappropriate for families and children, there is no equality.
The next one is, please know that when we started doing this in 2011, it was impossible and has become possible over the last many years of working really hard to do this. Like, she put her sanity on the line for queer representation in her show. It's probably to extents that we'll never know, but she's like, some of the songs she wrote for Steven Universe about anxiety and being stressed and that kind of thing, that was to deal with what the network was putting her through with gay representation.
She's more or less said that.
So here are some of the shows that followed her example after that door was busted down. They're not quite as strong examples, and some of these are a little outdated. I need some more stuff. I really need
We've
to
also
update
got
this thing.
stuff like the Dragon Prince is having.
Yeah.
Really enjoying the Dragon Prince.
Maybe we'll get some gay relationships where nobody's dead soon.
Amaya.
Okay. Alex Hirsch, the creator of Gravity Falls, says Sugar is driving a race car way, way, way ahead of everyone else in terms of LGBT rep. And in talking about Disney specifically when it comes to LGBT rep, he said, the truth is they're scared of getting emails from bigots and they're cowards. So they're letting the bigots control the conversation.
His show ended, so he gets to say things.
He does have a mouth on him, too. Loud House on Nickelodeon has 2 gay dads and a couple of gay kids, which is really cool. They're bisexual, right? I don't remember. I don't watch it. Sorry.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Star vs. the Forces of Evil did Disney's current specialty, gay people kissing in the background.
And then there's some genderqueer text for one of the lead characters as well.
Yeah. We've got OKKO, which ended in canon queerness between those two.
And several other characters. This is, again, Ian Jones, Cordy, Rebecca Sugar's husband. They got married last month.
He did a Reddit AMA about OKKO. Someone asked him about whether or not those 2 characters are gay, because they always have to ask. And he said they are 2 cute cartoon characters and they're in love. Why wouldn't that be allowed in a kids' show? And Adventure Time, we've come full circle back there.
Okay, y'all. So the reason there was any queer stuff in Adventure Time was that one episode Rebecca Sugar boarded way, way long ago. And the crew that she left behind kept it going a bit. But it always stayed in this very strong subtexty area. And this kiss was not in the script.
Nope.
A storyboarder,
Because this is a
drew it
storyboard-driven
in
show.
without being asked to and just put in the notes, "Come on."
I love that fact. It makes me happy. So Adam Muto, who was the head showrunner of the show at the time, said that the ship of bubbling has been an ongoing conversation. And I think where we are now is a lot different from where we were 8 years ago. No kidding. So that's one heartening thing. The network has been dragged into having more conversations about that, largely because of shows like Steven Universe. Definitely Steven Universe. I mean, literally, Steven Universe. That was the one that had to take the lead there. It did the heavy lifting for all of us, not just all of them.
So this is the first major, wedding and kiss between main characters in a kid's show.
Well, queer main characters.
Yeah, I meant, we're talking queer.
Yeah.
And this wedding was first conceived in 2014 when we were getting Maui'd in real life. And we had an Utena-themed wedding. I wish we knew about this. So we could have had a Ruby Sapphire-themed wedding. We couldn't have known. But I want to read this quote as well because I think it's really important, and that pretty color is hard to read. Ultimately, I said, if this is going to cost me my show, that's fine, because this is a huge injustice, and I need to be able to represent myself and my team through this show, and anything less would be unfair to my audience. She did risk losing her show multiple times, pushing the envelope on queer representation.
And change like this doesn't come without taking risks. So everybody needs to stop being scared of losing $1 million when they've already got $1 million and take more risks. Somebody had to do it. So Voltron is this is like a really 50-50 topic. Some people are really happy about it and some people are really unhappy about it.
And however you feel about it
is valid.
Is super valid. One thing that I don't like seeing is infighting in the queer community, policing how individual queer people get to feel about this.
They tried. Voltron tried.
I think some people tried. I don't think everybody involved tried. The showrunners were, I think for the most part, straight cis people who with good intentions. Mm-hmm. And
they decided Shiro was gay
they didn't
during
know
the show.
What Bury Your Gays was at all. They did not do their research. So Shiro's lost love and future husband's minimal screen time was probably, however, not so much the showrunner's fault and more the studio's fault. Remember how hard Rebecca Sugar had to fight to get female-coded queer rep.
And remember what we said about gay men being considered more threatening in America. Woo.
So a show that executives see as aimed at boys. That's how the executives see it. I know that the creators said this show is for everybody, but the executives, the people who are funding this show,
they always have a demographic in
their
mind.
bottom line is a money number and a demographic range. And that was boys 8 to 12.
Want me to go on?
And yes. Yeah. And so toxic masculinity and homophobia were a huge part in what sort of muzzled the amount of content we actually got on the show.
Yeah, so we've got good parts and bad parts. We'll start with the bad parts because I like ending on a positive note in a certain topic. Our disabled QPOC character suffers more trauma than any other character in the story by far, including Bury Your Gays. Yeah, that's pretty problematic.
Netflix really overhyped how much content there was going to be in their advertising campaign. When you read actual interviews with the creators, they didn't do any more or less than was promised in interviews. But when you look at the imaging that Netflix put up, it really oversold it.
Mm-hmm. We had all seen Steven Universe. We had already come to expect something better than what we were given.
And think about it. There's we're all elder gays, right? A lot of us here in this room are elder gays, and we were like, yeah, this is new. But the the baby gays who were like realizing they were gay during Steven Universe had much higher standards. They thought this was just the way things are in general, is to have a Steven Universe level of content. And they expected the Steven Universe level of content to be reflected in shows that were aimed at the 8 to 12 little boy demographic.
Yeah. Another downside is Shiro's husband is just a guy who shows up. We never get to know him or anything like that, and it seems like a careless little move at the end. But let's talk about what's good about it.
I think one of the big problems is it's great to give a gay character a happy ending. However, we got a lot more development of all these straight relationships in
And they
the
were
show.
all worse. Don't at me.
Pros. The main character, the biggest role model, the most
popular,
beloved.
the one who they tried to kill twice until people said, no, you can't, people love him too much.
He gets to be an out gay man in a show aimed at boys, and that is huge.
We must not take that for
That
granted.
hasn't really happened before. An action show aimed at the 8 to 12 boy demographic has a queer main character who gets a happy ending.
And his husband might not be an established character with any lines, but like a whole generation of kids, young boys, will get to see a happy ending where two men kiss and get married. That's awesome.
And also, like we said before, your fave is problematic, that's fine. This can still be extremely valuable. The benchmark of it just being a positive representation of a queer man has meant so much to so many queer people I've talked to. And I hate that there's infighting, making them feel ashamed, like they're a bad queer person for having seen bits of themselves in Shiro.
Yeah, you're not.
Yeah.
If you love Shiro.
You
if you
found
identify
things in
with
Shiro, great.
Or any of the other guys.
Problematic rep is an opportunity to push the conversation. You can be like, I liked this part was not enough, this part was not good. We have a springboard. When nothing is happening, there's nothing to talk about. No one's gonna listen, but when somebody messes up and we get to make a big stink about it, they get to learn about what they need to do better next time.
And that means that future animated shows might have an easier time with male queer characters.
Basically, this broke some ground.
And onto that broken ground stepped She-Ra, a big, big gay step in the right direction. So Netflix hired Noelle Stevenson, who is openly queer. Let me just make clear that Rebecca Sugar wasn't out when she was hired. She wasn't out when she was given a show. Noelle Stevenson was 100% out when she was given this show.
She was like, my comic's called Lumberjanes. I'm a lesbian, wearing all the flannel.
Assume all my characters are queer unless stated otherwise, is the thing she said. The show has a really open and really subversive approach to gender.
Visibly queer characters. And again, they're still kind of towing the subtext line a little bit because they have not that often said, I, Katra, am gay. You know, we don't have that
She
as
don't
a
need
line.
to say it.
I adore really like muscly women. Like, we see it on screen well enough.
Oh yeah, here's the things that we can't really deny. I mean, come on. We've got, I don't even have the most recent things, like Bo has two dads, visibly queer relationships between adults, empowering female roles that are not restricted by gender even a little bit.
I don't think this version of the panel has Double Trouble on it yet, but Double Trouble!
Non-binary character, yeah. Thank you.
But yeah, Double Trouble, canon non-binary character using
Men
they,
without
them
toxic
pronouns.
masculinity, body diversity, and the gay agenda.
Let me
For
finish
all of
talking
us.
about Double Trouble. Come on. Double Trouble is a
Well, I
canon.
don't have a slide for them.
I'm talking about them.
Okay, you all know what they look like.
Double
right?
Trouble has a canon non-binary character voiced by a non-binary actor, and they are chaotic neutral, so not a villain. Yeah. And absolutely a delight to watch.
So we want to emphasize that even though She-Ra leaves us all in a really good gay mood, that the fight is not over. Homophobia and transphobia are still global issues.
Particularly transphobia. The trans and non-binary communities are being attacked a lot right now.
Steven Universe was pulled from airwaves in different countries who refused to air it because of its queer content, or it was edited heavily in other countries to remove all inferences to sex perversion. See what I did there?
We're talking about Star Wars discourse. The reason that happened the way it did is because they don't want to have to take a bunch of the movie out in the China release.
Yeah. Homophobic governments, meaning like other countries and social purity groups,
Where the Hays Code is more than just the inside code, but it's in the law.
they're pressuring people who create media to bend to their homophobic will. So we don't just have to worry about American pressure, but international pressure now too. And our own government continues to attract the trans community relentlessly. And if they attack the trans community, they're coming for the rest of us. Don't forget that.
Not to mention, there's still not a lot of protections for the queer community in terms, there's the phrase, married on Sunday, fired on Monday.
And they're sending that to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court is screwed. So I don't want to get all scared. Anyway, marriage equality was not the end of the fight, and if anyone tells you that it was, they're straight.
Well said.
So Steven Universe and She-Ra are also not the end of this fight.
I think it's really important to keep demanding better. Nothing is above criticism, but I think it's very important to support queer creators. It's not that a queer creator is above criticism, but they don't need to be criticized more heavily than the cis straight creators. We need to support them. We need the criticism to be constructive in nature.
I know us queer folks are super, super good at infighting, but if we took that energy and projected it outward, imagine how much more powerful we could become.
And always remember, we're family appropriate.
We are family appropriate. Don't ever censor yourself. Thank you. Yes, look, right on.